Hey, it's Millie, and welcome to the Generalist World podcast. This is a show where I interview people from the Generalist World community, and we talk things like the future of work, careers, predictions, their hot takes, and really understand what their squealy careers have looked like. So if you're a generalist who feels like they're living in a specialized world, this is the podcast for you. For some reason, I started with a little weird dance, but it's become a tradition. It's become a ritual.
I'm totally into it. I think it's Friday. Well, who knows when you're listening to this, but any day we should always be dancing.
There you go. This is the fantastic way to start. Pearl, welcome to the Generalist World podcast. I'm so jazzed to have you here.
Thank you. It's amazing to be here.
Okay. We actually tried something kind of new this week. Well, not kind of new, completely new, where I just posted and I said, hey, if anyone has questions, can you share them? And so I've actually got kind of a pool of listener questions. But I wanted to begin by kind of just setting the ground for people. If someone has never come across you, if someone has never heard of you before, why might they be excited to spend the next 30 or so minutes with us?
So I'll answer that in I'll start with what I love to do. And if these things align for you as a listener, then keep listening. But what I love to do, I am a very happy co-parent of a 7.5-year-old. So I absolutely love being with her. I've had a very, very squiggly career. I have a tendency to every 2 years just kind of want to shift, change, challenge myself, push myself into new realms. I'm a bit of a workshop whore. I'm a facilitator myself, but I have been on so many different workshops, and I'm a constant learner. And then for income, what I love to do is facilitate large groups online. That's my sweet spot, and that kind of developed in the last 2.5 years after I went solo as a freelancer and started building my own business. So yeah, that's in a snapshot who I am and what I love.
I love that you named just there that, because I think when people think about pivots, there's like the stigma that comes with it. And it's like, oh, I changed my mind. Oh gosh, I changed my mind. But you framed it as that you like to challenge yourself every couple of years. And I'm like, that's it. That really resonates, because it's not simply about changing your mind, although it could be, and that's also fine. It can be this seeking or this desire of either deepening into knowledge or skills or an area, or just being like, I actually just want to be a noob. I want to be like a newbie at something.
I see it as you're a starter energy or you're a maintainer energy, right? And let me explain myself. So starter energy is someone who likes to be the beginning of things. So, for instance, in my 20s, I love to be taking on new roles that maybe have just started in a company, defining what the role is, being able to dive into it. And then, year 2, you kind of embed it, you make it more formalized. And by the end of year 2, I'm kind of bored. I'm kind of going, I need to step and shift and see where else this kind of approach needs me. So I'm not your woman if you need to finish a project. At the last 10% of a project, I'm kind of starting to disconnect, and I need to pull someone else in who can really help crystallize and formalize those things. And I feel like that's why I went freelance, because I can lean into the type of energy that I am, which is a starter energy, which is about just being able to play and explore and to move into the things that give me energy, as opposed to maintaining a job that will start to take away from me. So yeah, that's how I kind of tend to see it. And I tend to always say, embrace who you are, and don't hold back from being someone, who shifts and changes and evolves,
Yeah, I love that framing. I haven't come across this before, starter versus maintainer, and it really resonates. It's like, I remember when I first started my very first business, a hop on, hop off wine tour years ago in Australia. I came across this concept of the visionary and the integrator. And I think it's adjacent. And I'm very much in the camp of also, I'm hard on the starter energy and also on the visionary, where I can see the vision. To me, it's like I can literally see it, but I need someone else, that yin to my yang, to be the integrator or to be the maintainer. And actually that's where Edja is so amazing. She's so detail orientated and process driven. And I'm like, thank goodness for you. And I think when you can name these things, name them and be like, this is my strength and this is not my strength. And the more we can talk about that, the better it is for everyone.
Absolutely. And I feel like we need to understand that the world needs all of us and the different flavors of all of us. And to make maximum impact, you need those different types of personality types. And I'm still looking for my Edja. I'm like, I look at your combination and I'm like, bring me one of those. Like, please, just bring me one. And I'm looking, but it is interesting because I know that I don't need another me. I need someone who really complements me to be able to really then propel what I want to do and to make the impact I want to make, right?
Well, this episode is going to be published to over 40,000 people. So if there is anyone who is listening who's like, that sounds like me, slide into the DMs. Join us. So today you're running your own business. It's in the facilitation workshop space. And one of our listener questions was, what made you realize that this is what you wanted to do?
I have been kind of facilitating since childhood. You know, I'm the biggest facilitator in my family. And so there's an element of like this natural way of showing up in the world. You know, even at school, I was always the chairperson of the school council. You know, I was that person. I had like a pushing the boundary side as well. Like I wasn't like the complete goody, but for sure I loved doing those kind of things. And it was always an element in my role. And actually in COVID, at the time I was head of communications at an NGO, and I was, you know, doing progress reports, and my then boss, the CEO, we were yin and yang, but maybe didn't value each other for our yin and yangs. So when COVID hit, we did a lot more online sessions, and we went from kind of doing strategy weeks where all the offices, so we had offices in Kenya, Ghana, Tanzania, and Nigeria, and the leaders from those offices would come to Amsterdam to have a strategy week. All of that went online, and I started facilitating and designing these sessions where suddenly the whole organization could be involved, whereas before it just been the leaders. And for me, that moment of going, wow, there's such potential in facilitating, and this is when I feel alive, this is when I feel energy. And my boss at the time gave me such a gift, because in our review at the end of the year, she went to me, she said, this will never be your role. I need you to do something different. I hired you to be the head of communications. I see you wanting to go in a different direction. And I said, thank you. And I left a month later and went in exploration of like, okay, I want to be a facilitator. This is what I want to do. And actually leading up to that whole year, when I realized I wanted to be a facilitator, I did a lot of trainings. I just like kind of upskilled myself. And actually I missed a step, which is quite important to this story, because I did a leadership training. And I don't know if you've heard of Ikigai. Mm-hmm. So Ikigai is the Japanese reason for being. It's why you wake up in the morning. So Ikigai is 4 concentric circles. You have, you know, what do you love to do? What are you good at? What can you be paid for? And what does the world need from you? And I actually, in that leadership training, landed on facilitation. And that was the moment I went, right, I need to shift everything. But the current employer wasn't ready for that shift in me and wasn't able to take advantage of that shift. So that's kind of how it all unfolded for the best.
And what has that journey from being employed to being self-employed look like? Is there anything that, like, where from your vantage point now, looking back, that you're like, oh, I really wish I knew this when I was getting started?
So what really helped me when I went freelance, because after that organization, I went in-house as a facilitator, which it basically enabled me to accelerate my experience. And after 2 years working with that company, really small company, we both agreed for me to go freelance. And what helped me personally was that he became my first client, and he was able to, fund my first year almost of freelancing, and that enabled me the opportunity to play. And I have a really wonderful friend in my network, Lucy Hawthorne, who gave me great advice in that first year. She was like, just have the idea, test it, see where your energy is. Does it feel good? So for instance, I tested facilitation workshops in Amsterdam, and I came away going, sure, I can do them. But do I feel energy in them? Nope. And so it felt nice, and it was okay, and I enjoyed it, but it didn't actually fill me with a sense of thrill. And then I started testing with, there's a Slack community called Work on Climate, and they've got something like 30,000, probably more now, 30,000 members. And I just said to them, I was like, you're offering events. I can tell they're pretty rigid. Can I test workshops for you? And so then what I did was I just joined their events team for about 9 months, and I just tested 4 huge 300 people online workshops. And in that moment I went, yes, this is what I love to do. This is what energizes me. This is what my specialism is. And I feel like for me, going freelance, just giving myself the permission to test, iterate, also say, not for me. That was lovely, but it doesn't work. It was such a good approach.
Okay, 2 things I want to underline there is, one of them is the way that you work can shift. So I think there is people get really caught up in being like, I am a full-time employee, or I am a contractor. And it's actually, that can shift and change. And if you can do that within the same context. So for example, you went from being an employee to being a contractor, with the same client. And Edja did the opposite. She started as a contractor with us, and now she has flipped to being an employee. So I just want to name that you can operate differently within the same context. You don't have to start completely from scratch. And the second thing that I just love is your experimental mindset and your experimental approach to this, and going in saying, this is my hypothesis, literally like a scientist, this is my hypothesis, I think I'm going to enjoy doing this. Hey, turns out I didn't. Let me test this other variable. Maybe it's online groups, maybe it's groups that are huge, 300 plus. And so you have systematically, scientifically gone through and ran this experiment until you came out with what is exactly right for you. I love it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot that goes into that. I mentioned already that I'm a workshop whore, right? So in that first year, I was a participant in so many workshops. I allowed myself to train in different forms of facilitation and also moderation. So at each time, seeing where does my energy feel like and where does it take me? And I think that, my sense as a facilitator is that I rarely specialize in one line of facilitation. So I tend to use a lot of different methodologies. So I use Lego Serious Play, I use liberating structures, I use authentic relating. I basically train myself in lots of different approaches and methodologies, and I allow myself to then funnel that into one way of connecting people, which is big groups online, and I do some in-person stuff, of course, but I've basically realized that I want to keep my toolkit broad so that I can meet groups where they are and in their needs, but I can say to them, I know this is a pain point for you. I know that you are in distributed teams, you're in communities that are remote, and I know that budgets aren't there to gather people anymore. So I know this is a pain point. So I focused on the pain point as opposed to the methodology.
That makes a lot of sense. One of our listeners has asked a question in this vein, which is basically digging a bit more into actual tips, actual practical tips of facilitation. And I guess I also have kind of an adjacent question, which is around like the things that people get wrong. This was one of my questions, like the things that you see people always get wrong. And the listener asked a really important like side note to that, which is the things that people get wrong that can be easily fixed.
The game changer for me when it comes to facilitation was around design. So stepping back and understanding where are we taking a group from and to is the most important question, because if I'm not clear on that and what the leader or the group needs at the time, then I can't design for that group. And I design with Kaos Pilots 5E model, which is basically you're looking at excitement, entry, engagement, exit, extension. So it's like the life cycle of when you gather a group, and you're basically trying to understand where is the group now and where do you want to leave them, right? And so for me, the biggest mistake that often happens when we gather people, and I'm talking less about facilitation here, but just when we bring people together, is that we actually forget to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? And what does the group need from this moment of being together? And so that's the first like piece of disconnection that often happens, and then everything unravels from there. And I've had it where when I was an in-house facilitator, where I would interview participants before they came to Amsterdam to a 3-day offsite, where people would say, there's no point in this. Whatever happens here is not going to go anywhere. It's a waste of my time, but sure, I'll come to Amsterdam for a nice 3 days. And I put that back to the leaders, and they were like, and I said, this is about follow-up. This is about making sure that whatever happens in this room actually goes somewhere. And for me, I will not take those roles anymore with groups, because you're reinforcing bad culture. If it's going nowhere, you're reinforcing bad culture. So it's like, I don't know if that's a tip so much as a like
philosophy.
I don't know what it is. Philosophy, yeah. But for me, that's the starting point, because everything from there, you can design a nice session, people can have fun. But if you're not clear from the beginning, you're not going to get far. And then I think when it comes to specifically online, as I said already, I specialize in big groups online. And you give me a group of 150 people live translated in 4 different languages, I am alive. I'm like, well, let's go. Most people's worst nightmare. But I think the biggest tip I can give there is keep it simple. Actually, what people want is clarity of how to engage. They want it to feel easy. So I rarely use whiteboards like Miro or Mural, because it's too much. But I'm very, very intentional about how they're working together, but also how I give them time to think. So one of my biggest methods is liberating structures one for all. And basically what that does is, one, it gives the individual time to reflect before you shove them in a breakout room and they have to start talking, right? So you have 1, reflect a few minutes. How does this question land for you? What do you notice for yourself? 4, go discuss it, go share something, or go work on it together. What do you notice? And then come back and be really clear about what you want back from them. What do we want to bring back to the room? What's the shared story that we want at plenary as a bigger group? What are we trying to get out of this together? I think for me, that's the biggest tip. Keep it simple, clear, let people know exactly what's expected of them. No surprises. People don't want surprises. They want energy, but they don't want to be like suddenly put in a breakout room from nowhere, They want to be warned. They want to be told, how are you expecting me to engage right now? And yeah.
I love this. I think one other question I have around this. So recently, like this year, we started hosting really large workshops for our summer school. It was like a fun campaign that we kind of made up a couple of weeks prior, and it turns out it was just such a hit. Like we had like hundreds of people on these. We actually moved to Zoom because we were like, oh my gosh, like butter is going to break. And one of the things Edger and I were really conscious of is how do we make people like feel really, really safe inside these very large rooms, and particularly because you can't, it's not like when you host a GW event and there's like, 30 or 50 members and there's a deep level of trust and it's all part of the culture. Do you have any kind of, again, practical tips or advice on keeping people safe in these very large, and maybe even like not just safe, but how do you make the group feel smaller? Or do you just accept, like when you're one of like 500, how do you cultivate this feeling of like a tight-knit, safe space?
I can't make people feel safe. All I can do is I can give the best foundations, or like the best, I'm thinking of a word right now, but like the foundations so that they feel comfortable. I think for me, it's about comfort first, right? And whether or not they feel safe is like people have such different variations of what safety feels like and what that means to them. So for me, I'm looking at moving from discomfort to comfort so that they can show up in the way that feels good for them. So often, I have clients, for instance, who have said, oh, we have a culture where all videos are turned off. No one puts their video on. And I'm like, okay, cool. That's fine. That's not for me to judge whether or not someone is engaged. It's for me to create multiple different ways that people can engage and can feel comfortable, and also that their attention is piqued, right? That I have... we are battling, when we're online, we're battling for people's attention because it's so easy to open up your email and to go to LinkedIn. It's so easy. So for me, that first 15 minutes are the key, absolute key to making sure that people feel comfortable, that they feel welcomed. So it doesn't matter if I have hundreds of people landing into a Zoom. I'm saying hello. I'm like, hey, Millie, welcome, Millie. I'm like, hi, Luce, hi, welcome, hi. And then, and it's a way to just, it's a little bit chaotic. I don't mind if someone unmutes and it's a little bit messy. Sometimes, depending on the client, I have music playing. So, yeah, and I'm like, take your time, get a cup of tea, whatever you need, Let's just land. Let's just land in the space. And for me, then there's various ways that in those first 15 minutes, I am engaging with them. I am never presenting at them in that first 15 minutes. The last thing I want to do is to put up a PowerPoint slide and start talking at them. The first thing I'm doing is maybe putting them in a little breakout just so they can turn to their neighbor and say, hey, why are you here? Oh, I'm here for this, just to get their voices in the room. The other thing I'm doing is maybe putting it in the chat, a waterfall of energy so that they feel like they're part of something, there's energy in the room. And then the other thing I might do is just to do an extended Mentimeter, which is a tool, for those of you who don't know it, it's a very easy tool to just get insights, to get us talking about the topic. How's the topic landing with them? So for me, all of that work is about finding comfort and just getting settled into what we're talking about. Whether or not people then feel safe, who knows, right? But I do know that people stay engaged and they stay with us, and that I rarely have a lot of drop-offs. And then, yeah, of course, I do have sometimes feedback where it's like I didn't feel like I was included, or I couldn't quite participate in the way I wanted to. And that's all learning. That's a beautiful gift for me. And actually, this week, I've had one of the most difficult clients I've ever worked with. Because one, I care so much about this client. I absolutely adore what they do in the world. But from an accessibility point of view, I've had to really, really work hard to make sure that these sessions are accessible for people. And sometimes it hasn't quite landed. And that's, again, it's learning, it's insight, and it's also knowing that I'm not everyone's cup of tea, and that's okay as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These are amazing. This is gold. For people who are interested in facilitation, who are facilitators, or also I'm just thinking anyone who even runs meetings or teams or projects, like this is such a transferable skill. I'm wondering, if you have like, do you have a favorite question or a favorite set of questions that kind of, I don't know, that you keep coming back to? It's a broad question.
Yeah, I use a lot clean questions. I don't know if you've come across that before, but clean questions is basically where you take your opinion out of things. So things like, what do you mean by that? Tell us more. What do you notice? It takes me out of the question. So I don't have an opinion in any of that. And actually, I use this from my daughter, who's 7.5, to leaders, and my mother. What do you mean by that? Perfect question for a mother. So, this is what's really interesting, is that as soon as you take out your own opinions, then you're actually giving space for someone to position themselves or to say what they really want to say without you basically shifting the conversation in the direction you want it, basically. So that's, for me, really important. And the other thing, it's not a question, but the big learning that I had to do was also take away an opinion of someone's answer. So what I mean by that is, like, I simply say thank you. I don't say, oh, amazing, great answer, or yes, so insightful, because that's my opinion. And it's not for me to decide what is a good input versus another. And listening to that, other people might go, oh, well, she didn't say that about my answer. Does that mean my answer isn't as good? Or someone might disagree and go, well, actually, no, I disagree. That's not where we should be going. So as a facilitator, trying to neutralize myself is really important. And it's hard work, because I'm human, and sometimes I do see things and I get excited. I'm like, oh my God, that's such wow. And I'm like,
I mean, thank you.
Really touched me. But it's so I don't get it right all the time, but also just realizing that's the work,
Yeah, I'm so guilty of this. This is because it is such a natural, instinctual, like, I don't know, I guess this is how we connect, right? It's like, oh, that's what you said. Let me give you so I can see that. I think facilitation is probably one of those skills that it looks so easy, but there's so many layers to it. Like, to be a really, really good facilitator, there are so many layers.
Yeah, it is layers. And sometimes I sense that a lot of facilitators underestimate what they do, because that's so, like, part of their natural human, like, way of being in the world, that they're like, isn't everyone else like this? And then I realize, actually, I often remind myself on what makes me a great facilitator is what makes one person who's really good at data in Excel amazing. Their brain is wired for that. I open up an Excel spreadsheet and I go, wow, I just managed to do a sum, and I pat myself on the back, right? And so I always remind myself of my unique self by reminding myself of exactly what I'm not, and that there are people out there who are just, can take an Excel spreadsheet and make, beautiful art from it. And I'm like, it's not me.
Yeah, I feel that. Feel you on the spreadsheet. We have another listener question. So they are asking if you have any tips for small and particularly remote organizations that want to build this positive, fun, interactive culture, but from, like, this person's experience, it's kind of like happy hours. Like, that's what and they're like, yeah, no, it kind of gets boring pretty fast. How would you approach this? What would you do if you were working with this org?
Yeah, so one of the biggest insights I got this year was around how we communicate as humans, right? So Charles Duhigg does some work on this and has basically framed it as 3 types of communication. So you have transactional communication, which is very functional. It's like, what are we going to do? Planning, that kind of thing. Then you have emotional communications, like, it's like our feelings. It's much more closer to who we are. And then you have the social. And what I've realized with a lot of organizations that are remote is that they're really good at the transactional and the social. So social often happens on places like Slack. It's funny. And the other thing, for remote organizations is their little core team that they work with maybe on a day-to-day basis, they meet a lot of those needs. So you have the transactional, you have the emotional, you have the social, and maybe you have your work bestie. So you tap into a lot of that. What I notice is that the further you get away from your small team, the social becomes more difficult, the emotional even harder. And so actually a lot of the communication ends up quite transactional and quite, it's email, it's formal, it's kind of, can you do this for me? And we lack the human nuance of the connections within our organizations. And so for me, the biggest tip is that, social hours are tricky because we're pushing ourselves into a team where we maybe don't have the emotional connections. So suddenly we have to be social. And I'm saying this from a person who absolutely hates networking events usually, because I hate suddenly going into being with people that I barely know and I don't quite know what to say and I don't really know how to connect yet. So that's why those events don't really work, because we feel a level of like connection with our small team, but as soon as we move away from that and if we don't have any framing or support to help us connect. So for me, actually, the most important thing for small or any remote teams or organizations is to focus on gathering people around the topics that matter from a cultural, your organizational culture. So if you think about your culture, if your values are respect and your culture is set around being adventurous or being open, or whatever it is that defines the organizational culture, get people gathering on a regular basis on topics that matter. So I do this a lot with a client that is a coaching company, right? And we gather their partners on topics like giving feedback, and not in terms of like, your end of year review feedback, but more like, what is it to give feedback? What is it to receive feedback? Also on communication, how do we communicate? What is it to communicate? What is it to misunderstand each other? What does that feel like? So for me, that's often the biggest part that's missing for organizations, is this piece around talking about human topics, what it is to be a human, what it is to be a worker, what it is to be collaborating, and giving people to space to connect over that. So it needs some structure, it needs some thinking about, but if you don't, and it's not a one-off thing, it's not a, one workshop a year, it's a regular, touch point so that people it feels more and more normal for people to do that and to connect over topics that are important,
This has been so helpful for personally, selfishly for me, because I feel like facilitation, when I started GW, I wouldn't have even known what this word really was. It wasn't like on my radar that this is like a world. I think that's one of my favorite things about Generalist World, is I realize there's like so many different worlds and there's so much to learn from people who are in these different worlds. And I have a hunch that people who are in this facilitation space, it's a very generalist role. Like, it's a very generalist skill set. I love that you kind of differentiated between, specializing in a modality or just having like kind of this broad skill set of different ways that you can facilitate. And I see a lot in GW, people coming in and having one way or another, even they're directly a facilitator or they are facilitating as part of their job. And I wonder, like, what's your take on how AI changes or doesn't change all of this?
How does AI or doesn't change? Okay, so my feeling is that in the direction that we're going in, people are going to need the humanity, the connections even more. And we already struggle with it, right? So people need more and more the understanding of their selves, their human selves, their inner selves, in combination with AI. And so there's a speed at which we can now work. I feel it myself as a small business owner that I can work at a speed which I couldn't. Sometimes I'm just like, oh my God, I'm so thankful I have this here, because I couldn't produce at the rate I do. But sometimes that leaves me spinning, right? It leaves me spinning because it can go so fast. And so my sense is that more and more we're going to need to be intentional with the way that we bring people together. More and more, my feeling is that we need to spend even more time helping people to build connections and trust. You know, I use a lot Lencioni's pyramid, which is like the bottom is trust that leads to good conflict. And then I kind of forget the top tiers, but the trust at the bottom, and that's all about building personal story, right? But people struggle with this. And so for me, the role of the facilitators within our world is even more important. So I feel like our roles get even more necessary in an AI work world. I'm one of those humans that I know it's there and I know it's shifting everything, yet sometimes I feel like it shifts nothing at all. It just shines a bigger light on what's already needed, which is just better human connection, more intentional ways of being together, and more time for us to understand who we are and how we show up with one another, right?
I love it. I love it. And that kind of brings me to one of my last questions, which is around community. So you're relatively new to Generalist World. And I was wondering, what was it, if you can remember, that you were like, this is what I need, or this is the space for me? What was that kind of point for you?
There's a way that the Generalist team and the Generalist World team shows up in the world. It was less okay. So last year, my guiding question. So I often have a guiding question that finds me, which was, how do I live and lead in community? You know, I'm a co-parent. I'm single. I work from home. So finding community was really important for me. Whether or not it was online, I struggled with that a lot. But there was a way that you show up in Generalist World that I couldn't ignore. Like there's this energy. It's like, and for me, I had so much FOMO every time I saw what you were up to. I was like, I just want to be in here, because for me, that's how I want to show up in the world. I want to show up with that similar energy of like, joy. It's joy. You show up in joy. And we need more joy in this world, and play and silliness and just being like big in it. And so if I'll be honest, sometimes I'm like, is this Millie enough? Because it's so joyful, and I know deep in me that play and joy are at the core of me. I lost it for maybe 15 years in a life that didn't serve me, and I'm coming back to that sense of myself. And so I want to be part of places that just embrace it and just having fun with their lives. That's what attracts me. Yeah.
Cultivating joy. I'm so glad I asked that question, because everyone comes to Generalist World at a different point in their life. Sometimes it's a really low point. They're at like a crossroads and like shit's crumbling and they're like, we need support. And then sometimes it's seeking more of this like co-creation of like, okay, well, what it's like the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I think community is like the concentric circle that is like the one beyond that. It's probably not your 5 people, but it's maybe your 500. So it's like, it's that larger circle, and it's like, oh yeah, how are these people showing up? And I completely agree. The last few weeks, we won't even go into it, have just been wild in the world. And to know that I can just come into Generalist World, and it's not that you're ignoring everything out in the world, but it's like, it's actually okay to sometimes just take a break from all that madness going on and just be like, wow, these are humans. To your point about trust, probably one of my most trusted spaces on the internet, where I know that I can come and I know that I'm really not going to be judged. And if I ask something, it was actually interesting. One of our newer members this week asked a great question, and that was like, she was like, oh, are we allowed to like share LinkedIn posts, for example, like with the links? And I was like, It's funny because I've never actually written down this rule, but it's kind of just the culture of it has just happened where I was like if it's relevant, if it's a really relevant post, sure, or if it's like teaching us something, sure. But I was like, you'll see that no one is spamming like their LinkedIn post being like engage. Like, I was like, it's just not the vibe, it's not the culture. And it was such an interesting moment for me because I thought, oh crap, maybe I should have write this down and be a bit more like, yeah, like a bit more clear specifically around that. I thought it was a fantastic question. But I think the underlying thing to all of this is trust.
Yeah, and I do feel like in the world we're living in, we should have places of refuge and recharging, right? Because I can't go and have impact and gather people if I'm depleted. And the thing is, my sense at the moment, and it's a bit, whenever I speak to someone who's like, oh, I'm not sure whether or not to do this thing or put it out, and I'm like, the world is being annihilated and just pushed down by humans, unhealed, traumatized humans. And for me, I'm like, if you have something to bring to the people around you, however, whichever way you want to do it, please just do it, please. Because we need more people to just be having rippling effects on others. And it's like a moral need just to go do the thing that you love, to touch other people, to help them do what they need to do. And I don't know, it's like a little activist in me. I'm like, and also recharge yourself in that process, because you can't do it alone, and you can't do it without the joy and without the fun, without the play. It just doesn't, you will burn out really fast. So that's the two things for me. Go do the thing, but do it with good people around you, you know?
That's it. That's the headline. That's the subject. Pearl, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you wish I had?
No, I don't think so.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for coming. This has been amazing. And personally, I feel like my cup is more full from this conversation. And I hope that for people listening, it's the same effect. So thank you for sharing and being so generous in that sharing.
Thank you for having me, Millie. It's such a pleasure.